Hello and welcome back. Here we have something quite interesting. It's the WL Toys knockoff of the now classic WPL B1 1/16th scale M35 military truck. However, this is in 1/12th scale. It comes with a 260 motor, but unaccountably a single cell 3.7 volt lithium ion battery. So it's really not very satisfying to drive. I actually bought it for the cab which I used to build my M35 drag truck. However, this thing does have a 260 motor and I think it's got potential. So the first thing I'm going to do is to remove the poor quality original electronics and replace them with hobby grade stuff. In order to convert this 1/12th scale truck to hobby grade electronics, I have here an ESC, a full size servo, a micro servo in case the full size doesn't fit, and a 2-channel 2.4 GHz radio from FlySky. It turned out that I had to use the micro servo rather than the full size, but it seems to have plenty of torque to turn the steering. If I turn it on, we can see that we have decent steering, and quite good throttle modulation. I've reinstalled the original battery box so I can give it a quick test run around the garden. With this 2S battery replacing the 1S with which it was supplied, it will presumably be a little more lively. That test run made a couple of things clear. Firstly, this car's geared rather more high than I'd like. I'd gladly swap some of that speed for crawlability. And secondly, I was wrong when I said that the micro servo was going to be strong enough for the job. As soon as I drove it onto some soft sand and tried to turn the steering with the vehicle stopped, it was struggling. So I've been forced to make space to accommodate a full size or 1/10th scale steering servo. At least it should have plenty of authority now. I think the next question is, what sort of body am I going to put on this thing? Though I'm not yet sure of that, there is one thing I do know. The wheels supplied on this model are completely inappropriate. They don't look like truck wheels at all. So I've splashed out and bought a set of these. Luckily this model uses a standard 12mm hex, so I had a pretty broad selection to choose from on Amazon. I've got the new wheels painted and ready to be fitted. They really are high quality with lovely soft rubber tyres. They came supplied with foams and each one came supplied with 5 stainless bolts to put through. I've painted them a slightly lighter colour of rust so they'll show up. The old wheels haven't gone to waste, however. They've found a home on my HPI Mini Trophy. I'm looking forward to trying them out. I've painted the fuel tanks and done some initial weathering to the chassis and axles, as well as removing the ugly trim adjuster from the front axle. And I've ordered a couple of bodies. When deciding what style of body to go for, sometimes, just as with the art of seduction, it's best to approach the problem from behind. For example, if I were to fit a longish back body like this, I would have to go for a cab-over style. Or, if I don't want to do a cab-over style body, I can accept either a shorter rear body or a greater rear overhang. Obviously I'm anxious to avoid too great a rear overhang for fear of compromising ground clearance and off-road capability. There's also the question of the tall gearing I demonstrated earlier. My sister has bought me this gearbox for Christmas. I'm hoping that this will do something to reduce the final drive ratio. In fact, the motor that's supplied with this new gearbox is slightly smaller than the original. I may use some combination such as this motor with this gearbox. I'll have to see how things go. I've run into a problem with the new gearbox already. Allow me to explain. Here we are looking at the underside of the truck, specifically the output shafts from the gearbox, which are these shiny bits here and here. The output shafts on the replacement gearbox are 2.5mm in diameter. These are a whopping 4mm, which means that these drive shafts are incompatible with the new gearbox. I simply can't fit it. The reason I wanted to fit it was because these drive shafts are very poorly designed. They have a weak spot here. Phil from Tomley RC Garage has already managed to break one. So I had planned to use very low gearing and very low speed to protect them from torque overload. However, I'm now going to have to protect them electronically rather than mechanically. I have just fitted this truck with a crawler ESC, which provides an absolute brake and instant reverse. What I'm going to have to do is replace it with a different sort of ESC, one designed for fast moving vehicles, so that if I push the trigger away from me while I'm going forwards, I get a brake rather than slamming the wheels completely stopped, which would of course snap the front prop shaft in a second. Some time ago I converted my Charisma Beetle to brushless and I kept the brush speed controller. I've just installed that. As a result, we've got steering and throttle. So it looks as though I set out to build a crawler, but I've ended up building a trail rig. This brings us back to the question of what body I'm going to fit to this truck. Let's get rid of the truck itself and then I'll show you what I've got to work with. This is an Austin Shearline limousine in 1/12 scale, and this is a Ford Model Y in 1/12 scale. I'm wondering if I can combine the two and come up with a convincing truck cab. I began work with the Austin. The first thing I did was cut it in half and remove the roof. Then I cut the roof off the Ford. I took care to do that in such a way as to leave the body pretty much undamaged, because I'd like to use the body to make an open car in the future. I shortened the roof that I'd cut away from the Ford, and as you can see, it's starting to look a little like a truck cab. The next job will be to come up with a back for that cab. And to do that, I've just bent a sheet of thin styrene and formed this simple rear section. As you can see, if we look at the cab from the inside, there are some quite messy areas, but it looks fine from the outside. In order to provide somewhere for the battery, I've also arranged it so that the hood opens. I've modified the original WL Toys battery housing. This easily accommodates the LiPo I'm using, and this rubber band helps hold it in position. I've also given the body a coat of rusty coloured paint. I only had gloss, so I painted it gloss and then spent a while rubbing it down. As well as that, I've added these bits so you can't see in here. These are 12-gram CO2 cartridges, of the sort used to run little CO2 pistols and rifles. I've had an idea. I want to use them to make headlights by doing this. I've used a Dremel to cut the ends off, and I've polished out the insides of them and given them a quick squirt of clear lacquer to stop them rusting. I've got the body mounted firmly to the chassis. It's screwed to a couple of pieces of wood which are bolted across the chassis rails. One here and the other here. Okay, I've masked off every aperture in this body, and that can only mean one thing. It's time for paint. I'm going to get the salt out. As you can see, I've been quite generous with the salt. After spending some time on Google Images looking at old Austin lorries, I've decided to go for this cream and black paint job. The back of the cab is fairly plain, and at the front I've made a simple grille, and I've backed it with a radiator made of very fine-grained corrugated cardboard. The corrugations really are fine. It hardly shows, but I wanted you to know I put the effort in. Speaking of putting the effort in, while the paint was drying, I made this simple dash. The next thing for me to do is to glue that lot in place, and then I can add the headlights and glaze the windows. Radiator, grille and headlamps, the dash and the glazing are all done. I've also added some rusty door handles, as well as a little grab handle to allow me to open the hood, which is held closed by these two white styrene tabs which engage on either side. Next, it's time to fit a driver figure, and then I think we'll be moving on to the back box. The driver's sitting in his position and the body is firmly mounted. I had to do that before starting the rear body because the rear body blocks off access to the mounting screws for the front body, and for that reason the rear body is going to have to be easily removable, so that I'll be able to get the front body off to do any maintenance in the future. I've made some back lights to replace the horrible ones that were supplied with the truck, and I've also started work on the back body. I've made it from 5mm ply, which I've sort of veneered in very thin, very old wood from a fruit crate which has been maturing nicely on my junk pile in the garden for years. I've just glued the sides on, so it's still a bit precarious, but the finished result should end up looking something like this. Here's the finished back box. I had considered hinging the tailgate, but I decided not to, as it'll be a lot stronger if it's all glued together into one rigid piece. It's time to bolt it on. I kept thinking it looked familiar, and then it occurred to me that it sort of looks like a Tonka toy. I like the effect given by the real wooden bed. I know I could never have faked that with paint. Well, I'm dying to see it go.